Hi, everybody. Welcome to From How to Why Insights on the Technical Writing Process from industry experts. We're so excited to have everybody joining today. We have a great panel here, and we see people already writing into the chat. So if you haven't taken a look, go ahead and peek at the chat. We've dropped in a message there. And as we're getting started, so we're going to give everybody a couple minutes. So take a look at the chat. We'll get started at about 2 after. And the question that we have here is, what city are you joining from? What brought you here? So let us know where you're listening in from today and what interested you about joining the webinar. And as we are getting ready to start, I'm looking, so we have some people on the West Coast. So we're seeing Seattle, we got East Coast, North Carolina, Washington, Brooklyn. It's nice to see a good mix of people writing in. And the question about recording this will be available on demand. So yes. So I'm going to jump into, as people are joining, a couple of introductions and we'll go over logistics. So first of all, thanks again for joining the webinar. It's brought to you today by Good Words in partnership with our friends at Boffin Education. And a little bit about us. We're Good Words, a documentation consulting company, and we're on a mission to rid the world of bad documentation. We're helping companies to find and manage reliable contract technical writers. And some logistics for the webinar today. If there is anything you want to ask as you're listening and hearing from our panelists, please go ahead and drop that into the chat. You don't have to wait to the end to put it in the chat. Feel free to put it there. We'll be monitoring, and we will have time towards the end of our webinar today to answer some of those questions. So feel free to keep that going. We also want to put out a disclaimer. The ideas expressed by the panelists belong to the panelists, and they don't necessarily reflect those opinions of their employers. So please keep that in mind. And without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce some of our panelists and get into our questions. So for our panelists, we have first off our Good Words founder and CEO, Katie Cronkite. We have Kieran Morgan from Boffin Education, the managing director. We have Swapnil Ogle, technical writer from Amazon Web Services. And finally, Amanda Butler, documentation manager at Unity, joining us. So thank you to all the panelists for being here. We're going to get right into our first question, which is telling us, how did you choose a career in technical communications? So what made you decide to take that route? And let's get started with Katie. You can kick us off.
Sure thing. I'm super excited to see everybody here. Thank you for joining today. So I actually chose tech comm as my career when I was still a teenager. So I actually majored in technical communications when I was in school at Carnegie Mellon. And I had always loved writing from the time I was a little kid. But once I got to Carnegie Mellon, CMU was a huge tech school. And suddenly I was surrounded by all of these people who were doing really, really inspiring things in the technology industry. So there were people around me who were undergraduate students who were building what would become unicorn startup companies. People were putting moon rovers in space. People were doing all sorts of cool things. So, they were pioneering advancements that are now making huge waves in the technology sector, including AI, commercial space flight, self-driving cars, and all of that good stuff. So I knew from a pretty early age that I wanted to combine those two passions of mine, both writing and, what fascinated me about technology. So I went right into a career in tech comm. So I started my career as a technical writer as an individual contributor at multiple companies in Silicon Valley. I eventually became a consultant, so I got to do all kinds of cool projects with my clients there, and that ultimately led me to starting GoodWords. And so now we keep the magic going for all of our clients and all sorts of cool technology companies everywhere. So
thanks, Katie. Let's go next to Amanda. Can you tell us about your experience?
Absolutely. So my experience is very similar to Katie's. Ever since I was a little girl, I loved to write. I took my first physics course and just fell in love with science and technology and thought, oh, it would be really cool if I could combine these one day and do some sort of science writing or tech writing. And so I did. I started out in biotech writing, and after a few years, I transferred over to software and high tech, where I've been ever since.
Kieran, we'll go to you next.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks to Katie and GoodWords for hosting this, by the way. My opinions do reflect those of my employer because we're one and the same. So, look, I didn't choose tech writing, actually. I think tech writing chose me. I was working in legal publishing in the early 2000s, and I was managing a team, and we're running these fairly complex processes in this new thing called online publishing, which was pretty groundbreaking at the time, but clearly not anymore. And I kept having to train up all these new starters and coach them, and and I thought, gee, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I started writing documentation, and I started training them, and then eventually I started training up the whole company on these complex processes. And when I sort of started looking around for another career, I realized, hang on a minute, I think I've just discovered this thing called tech writing, and I think I've been doing tech writing for years now. And by the way, I can get paid 3 times as much as publishing. So yeah, see you later. I'll be a tech writer. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran. And finally, Swapnil.
Yeah, good. Look, it's really good to be here today, and I can see some familiar faces on the call on the webinar today, which is exciting. So I actually, similar to Amanda and Katie, I chose to be a tech writer. This is the only skill that I know. So when I was studying in uni, I was doing my business information systems. I was learning to code, but then I realized I actually wrote better words than writing code. So I said I can't really code to save my life, to be honest. So I'm like, I can read code, which is good enough, and then I can write about it. So I think that passion for writing, that's what I sort of said to myself, let's actually study to be a tech writer. And I did my graduate diploma in technical writing, and I'm here. I'm like, I've been doing it for the last 18 years, and I'm still enjoying it. I'm still enjoy the challenges with the tools and processes and everything. And yeah, I don't think I've got an alternative career anyway, because I can't do anything else, to be honest, other than writing. So yeah, there you go. I'm a tech writer.
Thank you. And so some of the people involved, the panelists today on the call, are authors for the Technical Writing Process book. And so, Karen, we'd love to hear from you. What inspired you to write this book? What does it do for the technical writing community?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So look, again, I didn't start out to write a book back in, when I published the first edition, right? I was working for this really great company called Cochlear. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're a biomedical company. They make hearing implants for deaf people, and software for surgeons and audiologists and all that sort of thing. They're quite a big company, and they'd hired me to be their Tech Docs project manager. But they just had this huge restructure and kind of demolished, half the company and their Tech Docs department. And and when I came in, they had no processes, and they had a few tech writers who kind of scattered to the wind. So I had to hire a team of tech writers really quickly, and graphic designers, and I had to build the processes from scratch and develop the standards really quickly, and all the while trying to get these new this documentation out the door for the product launch. And so I started looking around. I thought, well, look, surely there's a framework out there, some sort of process-driven framework that someone's developed with a bunch of templates that I can just, borrow and apply. And I couldn't find one, there was this old book, by Joanne Hackos, I think from the early 90s, which you couldn't even get in Australia at the time. It was out of print. So I had to very painfully build all these processes up, and my team and I together, and we sort of discovered how to do it, through trial and error in a highly regulated biomedical environment, which was pretty challenging. So we eventually did that, and then afterwards, when I moved on to my next job, I thought, you know what, I'm going to document this as kind of a generic framework. It might be really useful for people like me. So I made this 10,000 word draft, and I shared it with a few friends who are tech writers, and they said, you know what, Kieran, this is really great. You should do this and this and add this. And okay, I did. And I kept sharing it around. We kept adding bits, and this little draft eventually snowballed into this, 50,000 word book with templates and and all sorts of things. And it's done pretty well since. So I think to answer your question, Michelle, about, what does it do for the tech writing world? I think it does a couple of things. Firstly, it's a really practical framework, to go and apply if you're a tech writer or a consultant or running any sort of tech writing project. So it's meant to be for practitioners to run projects. And it's a good way for tech writers to think of their craft in a structured way. So, kind of a mental framework. Well, I don't just do this organic thing called tech writing. I go through a structured process that, no matter how big or small, it's kind of similar. Does that answer your question?
It does. And the next question we had for you is, how did you go from technical writer, so giving us a little bit of insight into technical writer, to managing director of Boffin Education? Tell us about your path.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, one thing sort of leads to another, right? So I went from publishing into tech writing, and then from tech writing, I went into telco, where I was very enmeshed in the product development function at a big Australian telco. And I ended up defining their product development process and their governance framework, and running their governance forum for about 5 years every week. So my job there was to, and documenting lots of stuff as well about their processes and how to run stuff. And after that, I went to, that was 5 years, and I went and did some consulting for my state education department, the Public Education Department of New South Wales. And whilst I was there, consulting to the education department, because I'd been in products, just so enmeshed in product land for 5 years, and going along to these product meetings where product managers would pitch their new products and try and convince the board to approve them, I just started, I couldn't help think of education as a product, and what a fantastic product it was. It's scalable, it's a digital good, you don't have to stock stuff, so it's got all these really good benefits. Not just for companies, but for society at large, obviously. And then I thought, hang on a minute, I think I've got an education product already. It's the technical writing process, and it's been around for 10 years, and it's done fairly well. It's pretty well known, and people were using that already as an education product. They were turning my book into a course, and that's how I met Julia Hurley, by the way, who's our head of learning and development at Juliet, director of learning and development at Boffin Education, and we're about to launch some courses. So, that's how it kind of transpired. Sorry, hopefully that answered your question, Michelle. Apologies if that was a little bit of a long-winded route.
No, that was great. Thank you for telling us more about your path. And as we're thinking about the book, so much of it is about technical writing, best practices. And so, Swapnil, we'd love to hear for you around best practices for technical writing, content design that you've learned in your career, and what that looks like.
Yeah, that's sorry, that's a great question, Michelle. I think being a tech writer, there's a lot of misconceptions around when you get into an organization. People are like, hey, you're a tech writer, can you just quickly write up this thing for us? And which is fine. I mean, that's what they paid to do. So, but one of the things I realized working with a lot of organizations, similar to other folks on this panel, I've consulted and contracted with a lot of organizations where I was probably their first tech writer. So I was like, there's more to tech writing than just writing. Yeah, there is a planning, there's research, and then obviously there's design, and a lot of these elements often get overlooked. So technical content design for me is something where you're not only thinking about writing the content, but it's also that presentation layer, the structure of a structure of a document, or how you present that information. So I think over the years, technical content design has evolved, but what I feel is with technical content design, I think the basics pretty much stay the same. You have to make sure your content is easily searchable, so people can actually find it, because there's no point of being available if people can't actually even find it. And the other thing is, obviously, there has to be a story, and also it has to have a very clear purpose of someone jumping onto your documentation or your content or technical content, whatever they're looking at. It needs to address their problem immediately. They might only be in there for a few seconds or a few minutes to understand or to try and solve something that they're stuck on. And if that piece of documentation doesn't help them answer that question, it might as well not exist. So I think those principles of being able to have content that's easily searchable or clear and consistent, and also have some sort of context around it. It's not only just that part. It's also having a little bit of a story, a little bit of a pattern and a clear structure. So it's a way of people, when people jump onto documentation, they are able to find exactly what they need. Then it helps them answer the question, and off they go. Then they're pretty much happy to go on their own path and discover something else.
Taking that a step further, when we think about cognitive load, why is it important to consider cognitive load when someone is developing content?
Yeah, see, again, just to add to my previous comment, it's one of the things where you're writing content, which is the core of tech writing, but then there's the presentation and the structure level of it. So there's already multiple layers that you're exposing your end users to. Plus, it's not the only piece of software they're going to be touching on during a day. And I speak from a software perspective, because that's a lot of documentation that I write. So it's around a particular piece of software or developer code. So they're already sort of doing one thing, and then they jump onto documentation. So there's already that additional step that they've taken to be able to get to that documentation. And if you try and confuse them there's a lot of load. Like, human brain obviously is notorious for being able to retain anything that is not there. It sort of streams off into different formats. So it's human memory is limited, so you have to make the most of it. So that's where that cognitive load theory comes into picture, where you try and expose them to only one thing at a time, and then obviously it sort of takes the load off for them to understand what are they trying to achieve through this piece of documentation. So if you present that information in a clear, consistent way, like I said before, it's easily searchable, it's easily it's clear and consistent, it has enough context, it reduces that cognitive load on them. So you present that information in a way that's easy for them to digest, to be able to perform that task. And that's what tech writing is about. Sometimes people try and build all these different theories, and which is great, but I think the basics of tech writing is, has this piece of content actually helped you answer a question? If yes, I think that's a success. So it's just that reducing that cognitive load of not being able to go off into different tangents. Just be there in present. It's almost like I try and equate that to a sort of a life theory. It's like, be there in the moment. So if that content is with you in that moment, helps you answer that question, I think it helps reduces that cognitive load.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for walking us through what some of those considerations are and what that looks like with the technical writing content design. As we are thinking about best practices and emerging technology, Katie, moving to a question for you. With content development, it's poised to change because of AI technology and new tools with incorporating AI. So I'm wondering, why is it important for technical writers to embrace AI that's coming on the scene and learn about it?
Totally. So I talk a lot about this in the chapter that I contributed to the second edition of the technical writing process, which is all about incorporating AI and AI tools into the actual daily work that we do as tech writers. And the most basic answer here is it's important for us to embrace AI and learn about it, because it's already here, whether we like it or not. So AI and large language models are changing the technology sector in huge ways, and not just for us technical writers. I think that it's very much at the forefront of writers' minds, because LLMs write content, right? But these things are also poised to change how software engineers do their work, how marketing teams work, knowledge and support people, and pretty much name a role at a company. And I think people are thinking about ways to apply AI to it in their work, right? So whether we as individuals choose to embrace it and are really excited about it, or whether it freaks us out and we don't want it to take our jobs, I think regardless, no matter kind of where we fall on that spectrum, like AI is here and it's already changing how we do work, and it's going to continue to change how we work. And I think this is also super relevant for technical writers. The analogy I like to use is like, imagine that you were a scribe in the year 1440 and all of a sudden the printing press bursts on the scene and changes your entire life, right? So that role obviously changed, and that role as it was known became obsolete once that technology came onto the scene. But it also ushered in this whole new information age, and it completely changed the way the world disseminated and produced information and shared it, with the rest of the world, right? So while one particular role changed a little bit because the tools changed, it also sort of opened up this like massive, information age that, tech writers now in our roles here, like we're now a part of that, right? So I see AI and AI tools kind of in a similar light. Like, there's a huge opportunity for those of us who already have these skills in content production and content management, who know how to make great content and make it useful for our audiences. And I mean, I think we are sort of, as tech writers in this industry, kind of poised to meet this moment in a really unique way and really bring a lot of expertise and influence to it. And I mean, I'm sure there are ways that AI is going to impact our roles and the roles of the people around us in ways that we haven't even imagined yet, but it's definitely going to be exciting, and it's already here and it's already starting. So
Thank you. Amanda, you're a technical writing manager, and with all of the changes that are happening in the industry, why do you see technical writing as being important? And as a manager, how are you thinking about developing employee skills to meet this moment?
Ooh, a two-parter. So I'll answer the first part first. Why is tech writing still important? And I think the obvious answer to that is you can have the most impressive, coolest technology in the world. And if your customer can't figure out how to use it, it's all for nothing. In fact, the more impressive your technology is, the more frustrating it is to customers if they can't figure out how to use it. And technical writing solves that problem. Tech writing tells customers how to use your product, when to use your product, why to use your product. And tech writers manage that process, whether they're using certain tools or not, whether they're the ones writing the content, whether they're the ones feeding their content into the AI, into the learning models. But that sort of brings me to the next part of your question. I think technical writing is evolving. It's less of a passive practice than it used to be. Instead of just writing content about something that someone else has already built, and this sort of points to Swapnil's point earlier, tech writers are taking a more active role in product decisions and product discussions. And I think as a manager, your job is to help your employees develop those soft skills and those leadership skills to take part in those discussions. For example, a good technical writer knows when to write and explain complexity in a code, and when to push back and advocate for simplifying that code for the customer. A good technical writer feels comfortable having discussions about terminology, about user experience, about product design, about more than just doing the writing, but things that affect the writing. And as a manager, it's your job to really help nurture and develop your employees' skills having those conversations so they can have them tactfully and confidently and really just develop those leadership skills.
And you're talking about, Amanda, this move from maybe more of a in the past, a passive approach to really actively and critically thinking about how to consider development of skills. And so to that point, Katie, when we think about going back to the idea of AI, it has capabilities, but it also does have limitations. So I would love to hear from you. What can AI, from your perspective, do? What can't it do? And why are technical writers still relevant in this day and age?
Yeah, I want to kind of riff off what Amanda just said. And I think technical writer as a term for how our roles have evolved, particularly in the last couple of decades, is very simplistic and kind of reductive, actually. Like certainly we do writing as part of our roles and as part of our career, but we're also involved in, advocating for the user's needs, advocating for when there need to be changes to design or how the product works, things like that. I know in my role when I was an individual technical writer, I was heavily involved in engineering decisions and advocating for my users. So, I think the term technical writing even, is pretty simplistic for the range of things that we do. So, when it comes to AI and what it can and can't do, but perhaps I'm biased here, but I actually think that technical writers and our skill sets are of premier importance in this age of AI. So, if you read my chapter in the book or purchase the book and kind of look and see some of the AI content in there, I talk a little bit about how the basics of how these large language models work and why it's important to understand them and to know what they can and can't do and how it impacts our work. So first and foremost, these large language models, ChatGPT, GPT-4, Google's LLMs, other companies, those large language models have been trained on our content, among all the other content on the internet, but on our technical content as well. And it is going to continue to be trained on new content that we write and produce. And so I mentioned just a second ago that, understanding how these large language models actually are programmed to work, I think is really important. So LLMs, at least right now, are trained on existing content. So they have to look at content that already exists. They looked at the entire internet, which is full of content that writers wrote, right, in order to be able to train and develop the technology that we're seeing now. Whenever we type a prompt into ChatGPT or something like that. So it can only produce content based on work that already exists. And in our role as technical writers, kind of like by definition of our role, we are writing about new things, new ideas, new technology, new products. That's something that AI can't do. I think of an example, in my own career from a zillion years ago. I once wrote a white paper on blockchain back when maybe 100 people in the world actually knew what blockchain was. And I think that's going to continue to be true, right? Like there's always going to be new advancements in technology. Someone is going to have to write it at least the first time for AI to be able to do anything with that information kind of going forward. So actually, I think that tech writers are pretty uniquely poised to have a very, very relevant spot in this age of AI. And in addition, I think one of the most important things is, we focus a lot on the writing that AI does or the content production, but these AI tools are not content management tools. So these LLMs make it very easy to produce a large amount of content very quickly and pretty cheaply, right? That means we have a proliferation of content online, even more than we used to, right? Some of it's good, some of it's trash, right? I'm sure we've all seen that. But as tech writers and as content managers, I think we know uniquely from our experience that actually writing and producing the content the first time isn't the end of the story. And it's honestly not even usually the hardest part of the job. The hardest part is maintaining that content, making sure it's factually accurate, updating it when it changes, knowing what needs to be said and what shouldn't be said. And making sure that your users can find that content among the sea of information that they're swimming in, right? And that sea of information is only getting bigger as more and more AI generated content is kind of appearing on the scene and on the internet, right? So AI can't do that part of the job right now. AI is not a content management system. It is not a content management tool. It doesn't make decisions about what is good content, what is effective content, and what isn't. Also, I mean, AI tools are notorious for hallucinating information, making up facts, doing things like that. So I think that there is still a very, very important role for people to do that manual fact checking and to make sure that, we're not plagiarizing information when we shouldn't be, or we're not making up things that aren't true. I had a conversation actually with an acquaintance of mine last week, and he put it really well. He said that he believes that technical writers are sort of like uniquely positioned with the skills that we have to be not just people who are impacted by AI as it's coming out, but who could really be leaders in sort of determining how this technology evolves, because we have kind of unique experience with content production and management. So that I think is going to be really, really influential as this technology becomes more prolific and just kind of like comes and becomes more a part of our lives. So I really want to see more and more tech writers, instead of being afraid of AI and what it's going to do to our roles, like, I want us to step up. I want to see technical writers, really taking the reins and driving the conversation around, how do people use information and how can we bring our expertise to that?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity with the AI technology that's out there for technical writers to bring that into what they're doing and embrace it. And Amanda, last question for you. What do you think is the most important thing or things for writers or managers to be considering to set themselves up for success in this next phase of tech writing as a discipline?
It's a great question. I actually have an answer for this one. You can tell this is the type of question I'm really excited to answer. I think there are so many things that you can do to set yourself up for success. But I think the most important thing you should do as a writer or as a manager to set yourself up for success are to know your value, to know how to show your value, and how to improve your value. So you need to know, how do you define success? How do you measure that success? How do you interpret those data to explain that success? And how do you keep building on that success? For example, if you or your team are going to revamp part of your docs, and you know that part of your documentation is poorly organized or poorly written or out of date, and you just want to revamp the whole section, before you start, you should be intentional about looking at the data. Look at, what are the page views? What are the number of customer service tickets around, or customer support tickets around that issue? If you do customer surveys, how many people have said they couldn't find what they were looking for in that portion of the documentation, or they were confused by that portion of the documentation? I think almost by definition, technical writers are really good at taking data and interpreting that to tell a story. And we need to be good about using it to tell the story of the work we're doing. So once you have those data, make the changes in the docs, rework that section, do what you want to. And at the end, look at the data again. You need to know what the outcome you're driving for is and what the actual outcome is. Did the page views go up? Did the number of support tickets go down? Were more customers able to find what they were looking for? Were fewer customers confused? And being able to have that data and really interpret it helps you not only pitch your value, but also figure out where to focus your efforts so that you can keep improving and growing your skills and improving your product. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, that's great. And this final question is for all the panelists. And so looking ahead, what do each of you foresee as being the most important trend in the industry? And whoever wants to kick us off, go go ahead and jump in.
Gee, that's a difficult question to answer, Michelle, with all the discussion about AI, isn't it? I'm just curious. Does anyone have an answer to this question that's not AI?
I do.
You do? Okay, maybe you should go first.
Sounds good. I know AI is the obvious, but there is a trend that I'd like to talk about that I see a lot that I think is important that I don't think we talk about very often. And one of the trends that I see that's important is that I think our industry overall, our profession overall, is becoming more intentional and more technical. And what I mean by that is, I think it used to be a lot more common that those of us in tech writing sort of fell into the role from another area, from QA, from product design, from engineering, from publishing here, and from all these different places. And more, I'm seeing people when I hire for new roles, I see people who intentionally went into tech writing as a career. I see more people getting degrees in tech writing, going to boot camps for tech writing, taking courses about it, and really just being intentional and official about doing that as their career. And I think that has pros and cons. The obvious con is if you're looking for a job right now, there's a little more competition, and the competition's pretty good. But I think the pros about that, the positives, are there's more information out there if you want to improve, if you want to get better, if you want to go into tech writing in the first place. It also means you're surrounded by more people you can learn from who can inspire you to grow in your skills. And it means that our products are getting better because we have more places to learn. So that's the trend that I've been seeing lately.
I would sort of piggyback on one thing you said, which is that tech writing is getting more technical. I think, back when I started in my career, a lot more of the technical writing discipline was focused around end user documentation, IT documentation, things like that. Whereas now I see so many more roles and opportunities for people who know how to code, know how to read code, know how to write it, know how to interpret it, for API documentation, developer facing documentation, and things like that. I think it used to be, at least from my own experience, it used to be a less technical discipline. You could kind of come in from other disciplines, which people still do, right? But now I think there is a higher bar for the level of technical skill that people bring to a tech writing role. And, we place, like I said, we place technical writing consultants on projects for different clients. And more, we are getting clients asking us for people with very technical skills. They're asking us for people who maybe even have developer experience or have worked as software engineers in the past for those roles. So I agree. I think AI and the ways that that's impacting everything is the obvious answer, but there are, other trends as well to kind of watch.
Yeah, I'd just like to add something to both Amanda's and Katie's comment there. And I'm just sort of keeping that AI elephant slightly in the corner there for a second. Well, one thing I've discovered, and I've been a part of tech writing communities for a large number of years, what's happened because of what Katie said was because the roles more evolved into becoming more technical than ever before. I think there's a lot of people now open to sharing their experiences and knowledge within communities. So you've got intentional communities who want to talk about, this is what I did with this sort of technology or tool chain or process at my workplace. Maybe you'll find, some sort of relevance and context with that. And I find that it's more of a trend where, people are now advocating strongly for being, I'm in a tech writer role, and we've got we've all, regardless of what industry you work in, we've got similar issues. Like we're not getting information from our developers. We're not getting enough information first up. We're not being involved early on in the process. So they're happy to talk about it. And I feel that that's a very good thing, because traditionally, I think tech writers overall, we're pretty shy sometimes. We don't want to advocate for our own work. And those intentional communities, are actually making a difference.
Thank you. Is there anything else anybody wants to add before we jump Yeah, Kieran?
If I can just add one thing, and I see a lot of questions popping up about AI, and there's a lot of concern for obvious reasons. I understand that, but one thing I would say is, we're in the same boat with pretty much every other knowledge worker out there. We do a unique role with a unique focus, but it's not just us. Every single knowledge worker is grappling with the same question. Hey, what do I do in the age of AI? Is my job going to exist? How do I fit in? What's going to mean for the industry? So, we're in good company, and I think we're going to figure this out together. And I think the only way to kind of, the best way to address it is, by kind of going headlong into it, like Katie has with her chapter, and just exploring it and figuring out what is this new technology. And hey, maybe if I'm one of the, first users of it, and I really figure it out, maybe I'll be positioned well. That's my 2 cents.
Great answers, everybody. Thanks for explaining more about what you see as the future trends. And now we are going to move into our Q&A portion. And so I know we've seen a number of comments come through with questions, and we'll go through those in the chat. Feel free, as we're starting to answer those, if there's other questions coming up, drop them in there. And we will kick off with talking about a question from Mark. So the question is, and I'll bring it up on screen here, what authoring technology is most used today? Do you work with source control systems? And anybody can jump in and get started on that question with software that you're seeing.
I can jump in here really quickly, because I think this has been also kind of an interesting trend in the industry. I remember when I first started as a technical writer, the tools we were using were 30 years old and hadn't changed in decades. And it was like that for probably about the first 10 years of my career. And now I'm seeing a lot more interest in companies developing more modern, more modular kind of documentation tools that aren't so onerous, which is really cool. And that also support different types of deliverables, so like API documentation, online help, and things like that. I would say that, a really big trend in what we see when we're supporting clients is the ask for Markdown and documentation that is organized and in Git repositories. So using Git for source control, because that's where developers are working. That's where they're doing their work, and they want the doc tools, instead of being these like 30-year-old dinosaurs that are completely separate systems. They want them to be a little more integrated into the rest of the development process. So that's what I'm seeing. But other folks, please chime in with what you've seen as well.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, Katie. It's just docs as code tools have become very familiar, and that's similar to what I spoke before about cognitive load. It's just that developers or anyone who's actually feeding us information, they don't have time to learn a new tool. They want to get on with their jobs, and our role as tech writers is to make their jobs easier. So I find any tool chain that supports or runs parallel with existing tools, they probably work best. There's no one answer to that, unfortunately, Mark, with like what works best in your particular scenario might not work best with mine. But it's just the thing that if you've got authoring any tool chain that works really well with existing systems, they don't have to learn a new tool, they don't have to integrate another tool into their workflow. I think that works best. And source control systems, I think most of the development tool chains these days do support source control. So it's just it's a matter of picking the one that's already existing in your workflow and then just running with it.
Anything else to add before we go to the next question? I want to make sure we get as many as we can answered. Okay, let's go to a question from Lori. And so the question is, what methods are recommended for soliciting end user feedback on documentation?
I'll jump in on this one,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. So I will say that this is going to depend highly on how your docs are published. If your documentation is free and online, it's a lot easier to get feedback than if you're publishing print with hardware or if your docs are behind a paywall. But But if your docs are free and online, it's often easy to put some sort of feedback mechanism on the page. I've found across all the companies I've worked at that most people, when they're frustrated, they want to let you know. They want to let you know if your page is not working for them. And there are a few different questions you can ask. There's the classic, how useful was this page? I really like asking, did you find what you were looking for today and what were you looking for? Because it's amazing to me how some people end up on a page that is not where you thought they would end up, or they look for something somewhere you would not have looked. And it's really insightful. So I highly recommend putting those little feedback buttons wherever you can. But again, it gets a lot harder when you don't have free online docs.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that as well that you can sometimes triangulate this information from other departments in your company. So particularly your support team. When we work with different companies, we like to ask the support team, if they're available to us, like, what questions do you get over and over and over again? Like, because that indicates that the users aren't finding something that they need in the documentation. So while that's not explicitly someone giving feedback on the documentation itself, you're still getting important information about maybe what's missing, what's hard to find, and things like that.
Swapnil, Kieran, anything to add before we go to the next question?
Look, I'd echo that, Amanda and Katie's comments. I'm a big fan of the like-dislike button, but also enabling comments so you can dig a bit deeper.
Yeah, look, I write a lot of documentation that's mostly for internal users. So I just walk up to their desk or virtually and just ask them, did you find it useful? If not, tell me why it's rubbish and we'll fix it. So it's internal documentation works slightly different than end user. But yeah, in all seriousness, I think what Amanda and Katie said, there's a different ways, like online documentation is easy to track, and support calls or questions coming from support are a great source of information for finding out what users are really finding hard or difficult or easy with your documentation. But like Amanda said, if it's not working, they'll probably let us know, which is a good thing because then we can fix it. But if it's working fine, they won't let us know, and that's fine. We'll just take it that it works.
The next question is taking us back to the popular topic of AI. So this topic, the question is asking, Richana, with technical writing, which area of technical writing will actually hold up in the changing dynamics of the industry with the introduction of AI? So would love to hear from panelist perspective, what do you think is going to hold up in this changing space? And I know that's a big question, a lot to think about with it still evolving. Any initial reactions?
That's a difficult one to answer specifically, and Katie's probably best placed to advise. But one thought I did have before when we were all talking about AI was, I think in the future, every company is going to have their own AI, right? They're going to have an AI for talking to customers and an AI for talking to their internal staff and training them up and onboarding them. I think tech writers are going to be really, really important as the people who feed that machine with truthful information about the company. So I do see our profession of tech writing becoming really important in that regard. As to the specifics of which roles are affected, yeah, really good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, some of the low-hanging fruit for ways that I think AI is going to be really impactful. It's really easy for an AI to basically feed in your code into an AI and have it spit out some basic API documentation for you, or at least, information about objects and fields and things like that. So I actually do think that there will be a lot of opportunity to automate some of what we do manually in API documentation kind of first. That's not to say that API writers are going to go away or anything like that. I think that just some of the more low level basic tasks in that kind of role are probably going to be easiest to leverage AI tools for. But yeah, I honestly don't know. I think it's kind of too soon to tell at this point, sort of, how companies are actually going to realistically leverage it. I think in my experience in talking to people right now, everybody is exploring how to use AI in various places in their company, including content production, but nobody has actually really deployed it. I think because there are still concerns around data privacy, proprietary information, AI is hallucinating information and things like that. So I think this one, time will tell.
I want to build on what Katie was saying there and just call out specific industries may be less likely to be as affected as quickly. I know if you're in a high security type role, a lot of those companies, certain government companies or government organizations are not going to introduce AI anytime soon to any of their processes, especially if it's not their AI. So I'd say those areas in particular are going to be less affected.
I want to go to our next question, which is about it's specific to the book. And so, Kieran, you might be able to kick us off on this one. So this is from Kylie. It's asking, the book appears to be focused on writing for technology. Would it be useful for somebody who writes procedures, standards, etc., for engineers in utilities?
Yeah, like, really great question. Thanks, Kylie, for asking that one. And we have really focused on tech here, which is, it's where a lot of the jobs are today. But definitely there's other types of tech writers out there, right? And please don't feel ignored or that this book doesn't focus on you. And in fact, when we wrote the book, we did a big research exercise, and Amanda's smiling because she's doing that for our next book she's writing. And we went out there, and we talked to a whole bunch of tech writers, right? So we interviewed them for an hour, and I think we did 20 or more of these interviews, and we tried to talk to as many different tech writers as we could. We have tech writers who do hardware documentation, tech writers who do developer docs, or they do software, tech writers who do process and procedure, right? And they're actually three really distinct roles. They've got a common tool set, but they use different software, they use different writing tools, they understand different technologies, and we tried to write the book to be as universally applicable as possible. So it's the process that kind of sits on top of no matter what you're writing. So look, hopefully my answer is yes. If you check out our website, and there's an online version of the book, the chapters about the profession, anyone can access them. And they do talk about and profile these different types of tech writers. So yeah, look, I like to think, Kylie, the answer is definitely yes. It would be useful for anyone who's a tech writer.
Moving to our next question from Anton. So it's around fostering documentation culture. What are your important takeaways related to fostering that culture? Any
I'll go
thoughts
first on this one.
Yeah, Amanda.
So one of the things I actually hire for whenever I get the chance is I always say I hire for people who can be tactful, but in particular who can be cheerfully persistent and tactfully persistent. And one of the things I really enjoy is coming into a company that doesn't have as much of a documentation culture and starting that. And I think a lot of most of the people we work with, most of the people in software in most companies are good people. There aren't a lot of people out there who just want to make your life miserable and exclude you from making a good product for no reason. People want to help. They just don't always know how, or they don't know that they should. So I think persistence and consistently teaching people, this is how you can include me, this is how you can help me, and just really repeating that over and over again can go a long way. I've gone so far one time as to make a paper plate on a popsicle stick and write my name on it. And I told someone, I can't make this meeting, but every time there's a new feature that comes up, please hold up the fake me and say, Amanda would say docs. Do we have docs for this? And so they did. And I think most engineers, most other stakeholders really want to work with us and want to include us. And it's just the basic thing of educating them and then being persistent and following up all the time and until it becomes a habit of, oh, we should include documentation.
I would say this comes from when I was an individually contributing technical writer. I was hired in as the first tech writer at a tech startup in Silicon Valley. And what I found was when I came into that role, people wanted to work with me, but they didn't know what a technical writer was. A lot of them, this was their first time ever working with someone with that title. They weren't really sure what I did. They weren't really sure like what I produced for the company. So what I actually did to kind of resolve that in my own situation was I gave a presentation for like 5 minutes at an all hands that just said, here's what a technical writer is. Here's what I do. Here's how I can help. Here's how to work with me, kind of to Amanda's point. And that worked really well. I think it does come down to sometimes, I don't think people are malicious. I think sometimes people just like, usually there's one technical writer for every 20 to 50 engineers at most organizations. So it really comes down to just kind of educating people about what you do.
Thank you. Anything else to add before I want to go to last and final question?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's just that championing that cause of, if you're the first tech writer, if you're the only tech writer, make sure you make your presence felt like through multiple ways. Like obviously talking to people about tech writing and documentation and the value it adds, and also, educating them. Like I've had organizations in the past where, again, like similar to Katie, they didn't know what a tech writer does. So I actually obviously gave presentations, but also delivered workshops like, hey, if you're writing something, can I teach you a couple of good things that you can do right now that will add to your value with your existing role as well? But it also helped me as a tech writer because you're providing me that first draft of the documentation then, and it's far too accurate than what I would be writing up if I didn't know what the product was. So just educate them on ways to how do you start feeding that little drip feeding that information and making them aware of good tech writing practices, which is what the book is about. It's just those little practices, processes of how do you actually start getting that structure, that template, that style sheet into your head so you can start contributing, and that's where you build that culture.
Quickly, our last question is another one from Mark, and I would say this particular question would love to hear from Swapnil and Amanda on this type of, if you can quickly tell us documents you're writing, what are people in the market to buy?
Yeah, okay. So I'll go first. Look, like Michelle mentioned before, I'm not here on part of behalf of AWS, but in my current role, I'm actually writing documentation for our end users or end customers so that they can start using some of the solutions we've developed within AWS. So it's the implementation guides, it's highly technical documentation and aimed at the developer persona. But internally, like I said, a lot of my half of my documentation is writing internal stuff. So it's writing about how our products designed, like what does the architecture look like, what are some of the decisions we made going into building this product. So a lot of internal documentation as well, and there's also APIs, there's also some sort of interface documentation. So what you see on the screen, has it got enough context? Can we add some UI text to it to make it more meaningful so that people don't actually have to jump into documentation to find out? Like if it's all there on the screen, if they can finish the task on the screen, that's even better. So that's the kind of sort of different documentation that I'm writing.
Great. And Amanda, what are you seeing?
Similar to Swapnil, I and my team work for a company and write documentation about the products that we make. We do a lot of reference material. We do a lot of tutorials. It's all end user documentation. It's all free. It's none of it's documentation to buy. But I did want to actually touch on that just briefly and say one of the great things about having technical documentation that's free online is that a lot of our customers use it as an evaluation tool. I've definitely heard engineers and other people say, oh, if I try to find a product and all I can find is the marketing page, then I worry that it's slideware, that it doesn't really exist. But if I can find the technical documentation about it and read it, I might consider buying the product, whereas I won't if I can't find those docs. So that's something that my team takes very seriously.
Excellent. Thanks everybody for your questions. And to wrap up here, we want to remind everybody joining that you can go to boffin.education/subscribe, put in this code, and we'll drop this in the chat as well. So enter that code to access the online version of the technical writing process book, free with templates, and then also make sure for a physical copy to have that in hand and go through it. There's a print version for purchase on Amazon. So check that out and make sure you take a look at entering that code. Go to Amazon, read more about the book. And finally, we're recording everything. We're going to be sharing for everybody who registered the rewatch on demand. So that will be made available to everybody who joined today. We so appreciate everybody taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen and join our panelists. If you are interested in any future webinars from Good Words, make sure you're connected with Good Words LinkedIn page for future events and updates. And we'll go ahead and make sure that you have in the chat. Lauren just dropped that, so that's the code. Take a look at that. And we hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again to all of our panelists.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Kate. Great questions from the crowd, by the way.
Yes, thanks, Michelle, for facilitating, and thanks for everyone else for being here.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.